Hey, my name is Kaylee. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. This is Read, Rant, Review, where, you guessed it, I read books and I do rant reviews. Today we are starting a new series on the channel. I'm still workshopping the title of the series, but something along the lines of, in case you missed it, classic reviews. I'm going to be reading classic books, and as I do in my other reviews on this channel, I'll be giving you a beat-by-beat, chapter-by-chapter breakdown and discussion as we go through the book. This is by no means professional. My background is not in English. I'm not in the industry. Neither of my degrees are in English. I'm just someone who loves to read, and I just want to talk about it. I have had such an interest in reading more classic literature lately, but I have a hard time forcing myself to do it. So this is a wonderful forcing mechanism for me to read more classics and get spun up on the greats, and then also be able to share it with you guys. I've noticed that there's been a pretty big uptick on people wanting to read classic books, but it is objectively very difficult to get into. The language is hard to read. Maybe there's problematic themes with it that is difficult to consume. So I'm here to bridge the gap for you guys. I'll go and read through these crazy books. I'll tell you all about them, and we'll talk about them. With that being said, today we are going to be talking about Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. This book was published in 1937, which is crazy. It's almost 90 years old, and currently on Goodreads it is sitting at a 3.87 with 2.7 million ratings. This book is wildly popular. I believe it is regularly read in high schools. With that being said though, before I get into telling you about the actual book, I do want to talk about just briefly some of the current controversy about the book. We'll read it, tell you about it, and then at the end we'll do some additional discussion and commentary, and then obviously I'll be giving commentary throughout as well, okay? Super casual, like I said. We're just, hey, you, me, we're just some friends hanging out. We're just FaceTiming, and I'm just telling you about this crazy book I read, okay? Problem number one off the bat is the language that is used in this. Right? It is vulgar objectively. There's cursing. Especially for being 77 pages long, there is a lot of cursing. The bigger issue is the fact that the book uses the N-word quite a few times. And two stances on that, right? The one side says, hey, a white guy writing this book, why are you making your white characters say such a derogatory word? And you're depicting racism, like you're perpetuating it. And there's this like whole argument of a white guy writing the N-word in a book like this. Understood. The other side says, hey, that's not cool that we're talking about racism in a book, because then that generates discussion in the classroom, and some people don't want to discuss racism in the classroom, right? So there's like two sides kind of justifying reasons that this book has had pushback in recent years and why this book has been challenged quite often. Other things that go on that are concerning is the treatment of women in the book and the portrayal of women in the book. There's only one woman that is like regularly mentioned, and the way that she's talked about is very, very gross. And then same with any of the other women that get talked about in this. It is just like not a great look. But again, 1937, written by a white man. I don't know what else we would really expect. Not that that justifies or okays that behavior in any way, but like it kind of comes with the territory. You know what I mean? Like obviously there's issues with that, but hey, I'm the messenger, okay? I don't know. Don't look at me like that. So this is like the Google AI overview. Some of the other reasons that it's regularly challenged for schools is because it has morbid and depressing themes, which, yeah, dude, it's incredibly sad. I bawled my eyes out when I finished this book, even though I knew the ending already. Like I've known the ending forever. And I still cried reading it. And I'll probably cry reading it to you guys in this video. And then lastly, an anti-business attitude, which I find fascinating. Some have argued that the author's portrayal of the wealthy and powerful is anti-business, to which all I have to say is, eat the rich, right? What is the book about? If you're going into this totally blind, Letty and George, who work on farms in California, and they travel around, they've just been working on a bunch of farms, and this is a little slice of life story of a couple of days that they spend on this one particular farm. That's all. 77 pages, a little short novella about this little slice of life, and you get like this real deep look into their relationship and the relationships that they build with the people that they work with. That's all I'm going to tell you. If you have no idea what is about to happen in this book, God bless. It's not bad. It is sad. Okay. Like everything about this book is like just in general, just sad. Hey, I know, literally right when we're about to start the video, I have to interrupt. This is Editing Kaylee. I cannot explain to you how much of an absolute crap show that filming, editing actually this video has been. So 2 things before you continue. The only other thing I would like to acknowledge is the character Lenny, questionably portrayed, in addition to all of the other things that I listed earlier. You'll understand shortly. I do want to verbally acknowledge that is also a concerning thing that happens, okay? Yeah. Other thing, when you re-record and then you remove silences with the software I have, I can't do the captions. So there's going to be like a 6-minute stretch here where the captions are going to be a little shoddy. It's super hard to explain, but I also can't do anything about it. So I am so sorry. If you can just get through that first 6 minutes, I promise you it's perfect. I've spent so much time trying to get these captions good on this video. Please just give it a chance. Of Mice and Men, our book opens up with our 2 main characters, Lenny and George. Lenny is a very large man who has some type of delayed development. He doesn't have a very good memory. He speaks in short sentences. He doesn't have much foresight or recognizes consequences to his actions. He also doesn't know his own strength, right? Like, those are kind of the key things about him. George takes care of him. George apparently knew Lenny's Aunt Clara, and so when Aunt Clara died, she asked George to continue taking care of Lenny. So he did. So now the 2 travel together. They go from farm to farm in California to find different work. When they are dropped off by a bus 4 miles away from their next job site, George is understandably pissed off about being dropped off so far away, and he's just kind of grumpy, and it's super, super hot out. It's the middle of summer, and so finally they find a little bit of a clearing. They find a pond, and they go and sit by it to cool off. And immediately we get some indicators about their relationship. So a lot of this book I'm going to end up reading to you because these conversations are critical. They are reoccurring through the book. Like, you'll have almost the same conversation at different points in the book with entirely different meanings that lend to character growth, plot line, things like that, things of that nature. So I will be reading a lot in this video. The 2 men, I don't know how old they are. I don't know how long that they've been together. It has just been a very long time. And that's really all of the information that we are given. When they get into the clearing, the first issue is that Lenny immediately goes up to the water. It looks pretty stagnant, but he just starts chugging it, like just throwing it in his mouth. Says, hey, dude, you can't just drink random water. You're gonna make yourself sick. Like, it might not be good water. George knelt beside the pool, though, and drank from his hand with quick scoops. And he says, it tastes all right, he admitted. Don't really seem to be running, though. You never ought to drink water when it ain't running, Lenny, he said hopelessly. You drink out of a gutter if you was thirsty. He threw a scoop of water into his face and rubbed it about with his hand, under his chin and around the back of his neck. Then he replaced his hat, pushed himself back from the river, drew up his knees and embraced them. Lenny, who had been watching, imitated George exactly. He pushed himself back, drew up his knees, embraced them, and looked over to George to see if he had done it just right. He pulled his hat down a little more over his eyes the way that George's hat was. George stared morosely at the water. The rims of his eyes were red with sun glare, and he goes on angrily about the bus driver kicking them out 4 miles away. Lenny, after George's rant, he says, George? Yeah, what do you want? Where are we going, George? The little man jerked down the brim of his hat and scowled over at Lenny. So you forgot already, did you? I gotta tell you again, do I? Jesus Christ, you're a crazy bastard. I forgot, Lenny said softly. I tried not to forget. Honest to God, I did, George. Okay, I'll tell you again. I ain't got nothing else to do. I might as well spend my time telling you things, and then you forget them, and then I tell you again. I tried and tried, said Lenny, but it didn't do no good. I remember about the rabbits, George. The hell with the rabbits. That's all you ever can remember is them rabbits. Okay, now you listen, and this time you gotta remember so that we don't get in trouble. You remember sitting in that gutter on Howard Street and watching that blackboard? Lenny's face broke into a delighted smile. Why, sure, George. I remember that, but what did we do then? I remember some girls come by and you says, the hell with what I says. You remember about us going to Mary and Reddy's and how they gave us work cards and bus tickets? Oh, sure, George. I remember that now. His hands quickly went into his side coat pockets. He said gently, George, I ain't got mine. I must have lost it. He looked down at the ground in despair. You never had none, you crazy bastard. I got both of them. You think I'd let you carry around your own work card? Lenny grinned with relief. I thought I put it in my side pocket. His hand went into the pocket again, and George looked at him sharply. What'd you take out of that pocket? Ain't nothing in my pocket, Lenny said cleverly. I know there ain't. You got it in your hand. What do you got in your hand hiding it? I ain't got nothing, George, honest. Come on, give it here. Lenny held his hand closed away from George's direction. It's only a mouse, George. A mouse? A live mouse? It's a dead mouse, George. I didn't kill it though, honest. I found it dead. Give it here. And they have this whole back and forth. What do you even want a dead mouse for anyway? So that I could pet it with my thumb while we walked along. Well, you ain't petting no mice when you walk along with me. You remember where we're going now? Lenny looked startled, and then in embarrassment, he hid his face against his knees. I forgot again. Jesus Christ, George said resignedly. Well, look, we're going to work on a ranch just like the one that we came from up north. The ranch that we're going to is right down there about a quarter mile. We're going to go in and see the boss. Now look, I'll give him the work tickets, but you ain't gonna say a word. You're just gonna stand there and don't say nothing. If he finds out what a crazy bastard you are, we won't get no job. But if he sees you before he hears you talk, we're set. You got that? Sure, George, I got it. Okay, now when we go see the boss, what do? Lenny's face grew tight with thought. I ain't gonna say nothing. I'm just gonna stare. Good boy. That's swell. Now you say that 2 or 3 times over to make sure that you don't forget. And you ain't gonna do no bad things like you done in weed either. Like I done in weed? Lenny looked puzzled. Oh, so you forgot about that too, did you? Well, I ain't gonna remind you for fear that you do it again. George decides that he wants to stay the night in the clearing. They could make the rest of like the quarter-mile trek, like check into work, sleep in a real bed, get some supper at the farm, whatever. But George just wants some peace and quiet and just to relax out there. And so that's what they end up doing. And they make dinner that night, and he asks Lenny to go and collect wood for the fire. When Lenny does, he goes and finds the mouse, like the dead mouse that George took from him and threw off into the bushes. George hears him going through the bushes, so he knows he got the freaking mouse again and confronts him about giving it back to him. It's such a mess. I wasn't doing nothing bad with it, George, just stroking it. George stood up and threw the mouse as far as he could into the darkening bush, and then he stepped into the pool and washed his hands. He heard Lenny's whimpering cry and wheeled about. Blubbering like a baby. Jesus Christ, a big guy like you? Lenny's lip quivered, and tears started in his eyes. Oh, Lenny. George put his hand on Lenny's shoulders. I ain't taking it away just for meanness. That mouse ain't fresh, Lenny, and besides, you've broke it petting it. You get another mouse that's fresh, and I'll let you keep it a little while. Lenny sat down on the ground and hung his head dejectedly. I don't know where there is no other mouse. I remember a lady used to give him to me, every one she got, but that lady ain't here. George scoffed. Lady, huh? You don't even remember who that lady was? That was your Aunt Clara, and she stopped giving him to you because you always killed him. Lenny looked up sadly at him. They was so little, he said apologetically. I'd pet 'em, and pretty soon they'd bit my fingers, and I pinched their heads a little, and they was dead because they was so little. I wished we'd get the rabbits pretty soon, George. They ain't so little. The hell with the rabbits, and you ain't gonna be trusted with no live mice. George undid his bindle and brought out 3 cans of beans. He stood them about the fire, close in the blaze but not quite touching the flame. There's enough beans for 4 men, George said. Lenny watched him from over the fire. He said patiently, I like 'em with ketchup. Well, we ain't got any, George exploded. Whatever we ain't got, that's what you want. And God almighty, if I was alone, I could live so easy. I could go get a job and work and no trouble, no mess at all. And then when the end of the month came, I could take my $50 and go into town to get whatever I want. Why, I could stay in a cat house all night. I could eat at any place I want, hotel or any place, and order any damn thing that I could think of. And I could do all of that every damn month. Get a gallon of whiskey or sit in a pool room and play cards or shoot pool. Lenny knelt and looked over the fire at the angry George, and Lenny's face was drawn with terror. And what do I got? George went on furiously. I got you. And you can't keep a job, and you lose me every job that I get. Just keep me shoving all over the country all the time. And that ain't the worst. You get in trouble. You do bad things, and I gotta get you out. His voice rose nearly to a shout. You crazy son of a bitch. You keep me in hot water all the time. He took on the elaborate manner of a little girl's when they're mimicking one another. Just wanted to feel the girl's dress. Just wanted to pet it like it was a mouse. Well, how the hell did she know you just wanted to feel her dress? She jerks back and you hold on to it like it was a mouse. She yells, and we gotta hide in an irrigation ditch all day with the guys looking for us. And we gotta sneak out in the dark and out of the country. All the time. Something like that. All the time. I wished I could put you in a cage with about 1,000,000 mice and let you have fun. His anger left him suddenly. He looked across the fire at Lenny's anguished face, and then he looked ashamedly at the flames. It was quite dark now. but the fire lighted the trunks of the trees and the curving branches overhead. Lenny crawled slowly and cautiously around the fire until he was close to George. He sat back on his heels. George turned the bean can so that the other side faced the fire, and he pretended to be unaware of Lenny so close beside him. "George," very softly. No answer. "George, what do you want?" "I was only fooling, George. I don't want no ketchup. I wouldn't eat no ketchup if it was right here beside me. If it was here, you could have some. But I wouldn't eat none, George. I'd leave it all for you. You could cover your beans with it, and I wouldn't touch none of it." George stared morosely at the fire. "When I think of that swell time I could have without you, I go nuts. I never get no peace." Lenny still knelt. He looked off into the darkness across the river. "George, you want I should go away and leave you alone?" "Where in the hell could you go?" "Well, I could go off into the hills there, someplace, find a cave." "Yeah, and how would you eat? You ain't got sense enough to find nothing to eat." "I'd find things, George. I don't need no nice food with ketchup. I'd lay out in the sun and nobody'd hurt me. And if I'd found a mouse, I'd keep it. Nobody'd take it away from me." George looked quickly and searchingly at him. I've been mean, ain't I? "If you don't want me, I can walk off in the hills and find a cave. I can go away any time." "No, look, I was just fooling, Lenny, 'cause I want you to stay with me. Trouble with mice is you always kill 'em. Tell you what I'll do, Lenny. First chance I get, I'll give you a pup. Maybe you won't kill it. That'd be better than mice, and you could pet it harder." Lenny avoided the bait. He sensed his advantage. "If you don't want me, you only just got to say so, and I'll go off in the hills, right there, right up those hills, and live by myself, and I won't get no mice stole from me." George said, "I want you to stay with me, Lenny. Jesus Christ, somebody'd shoot you for a coyote if it was you by yourself. No, you stay with me. Your Aunt Claire wouldn't like you running off by yourself, even if she is dead." Lenny spoke craftily. "Tell me, like you done before." "Tell you what?" "About the rabbits." George snapped. "You ain't gonna put nothing over on me." Lenny pleaded. "Come on, George, tell me, please. George, you done it before. You get a kick out of that, don't you?" "All right, I'll tell you, and then we'll eat our supper." George's voice became deeper. He repeated his words rhythmically, as though he had said them many times before. "Guys like us that work on ranches are the loneliest guys in the world. They ain't got no family. They don't belong no place. They come to a ranch and work up a stake, and then they go into town to blow their stake. And the first thing you know, they're pounding their tail onto some other ranch. They ain't got nothing to look ahead to." Lenny was delighted. "That's it. Now tell how it is with us," George went on. "With us, it ain't like that. We got a future. We got somebody to talk to that gives a damn about us. If them other guys in jail, they can rot for all anybody gives a damn. But not us." Lenny broke in. "But not us. And why?" Because I got you to look after me, and you got me to look after you. That's why." He laughed delightedly. "Go on now, George. You got it by heart. You can do it yourself." "No, you. I forget some of the things. Tell me how it's going to be, okay? Someday, we're going to have a little house and a couple acres and a cow and some pigs and live off the fat of the land," Lenny shouted, "and have rabbits. Go on, George. Tell about what we're going to have in the garden and about the rabbits and the cages, about the rain and the winter and the stove and how thick the cream is on the milk that you can hardly cut it. Tell about that, George. Why don't you do it yourself? You know all of it." "No, you tell it. It ain't the same if I tell it." "Go on, George. How I get to tend the rabbits?" "Well," George said, "we'll have a big vegetable patch and a rabbit hutch and chickens, and when it rains in the winter, we'll just say, the hell with going to work, and we'll build up a fire in the stove and sit around and listen to the rain coming down on the roof." "Nuts." He took out his pocket knife. "I ain't got time for no more." He drove his knife through the top of one of the can of beans, sawed the top, and passed the can to Lenny. Then he opened a second can. From his side pocket, he brought out 2 spoons and passed one of them to Lenny. They eat dinner, they talk a little bit more about the rabbits, and then they go to sleep. And George asks Lenny one more time, what is he going to say to the boss? He answers correctly that he won't say anything at all. Chapter 1 is done. We get a little intro to the characters, a bit of their dynamic, i.e. George taking care of Lenny, and not that he's like an unwilling caretaker, but it is a lot of responsibility and frustration, and he expresses it, but he feels bad about expressing it. And then Lenny being so hopeful and so focused on this idea of having rabbits. Their whole goal is that they're trying to save up enough money to buy this little plot of land so that they don't have to work anymore. Like, they'll work for themselves and they'll have their own little slice of land. So in chapter 2, they get to the farm, they go to the bunkhouse, and they meet an older guy named Candy. He shows George and Lenny their bunks. Candy gets them all caught up on who the other people are at the ranch, including Crooks, who is the black man who tends to the horses. He got kicked in the back by a horse, so he has like spinal damage and he's like all hunched over and stuff. It's like really horrific to think about, actually. And I think Candy's like missing a whole hand. Like he lost it in an accident, and so he just has a little stub, so he doesn't go out when working in the field anymore. I think he just cleans or does something around the ranch in that regard, some other type of chore. It's like, yeah, not great living conditions, which is not surprising for the day and age, but like, good God. Eventually the boss does come in and greets them. George hands him Lenny and his work tickets, has a talk about what they're going to be doing on the farm for him. And the boss clocks that Lenny is not speaking. So he's like, what's up with that guy? Like, why are you speaking for him? Like, are you taking advantage of him? Lenny says, no, he got kicked in the head when he was a kid. I'm just taking care of him, but he's a good worker. Like, don't let it fool you. So now they have jobs. They were able to talk their way into that. So now they are employed. A little bit later, this boss's son, his name is Curly. He is a douchebag. He comes into the bunks, sees George and Lenny, immediately has beef with them for some reason, is just a tool and wants to pick a fight with everybody. So when he leaves, Candy, the older guy that stays in the bunkhouse, is telling them like, hey, yeah, Curly used to be a boxer. He used to fight. So he's like literally always just looking to pick fights with people and like cause trouble and stuff. And also he's just like really rude in general. Just keep an eye out for him. But more than that, keep an eye out for his wife, who got the eye and describes her as a tart. Now, I can assume what calling a woman a tart means, but let's look it up on Google and see what this says. Or a woman perceived as promiscuous. Oh, that's interesting. The origin of the word. The word tart originally referred to a pretty woman in the 19th century, possibly a shortening of sweetheart. So, yeah, right? Yeah, that's where we are. And also, assumably, got the eye, meaning like she's checking out other men or like trying to hook up with other men. She'll go out to the bunkhouse all the time or go out to the stables and find the workers and be like, oh, I'm just looking for my husband. I'm just looking for Curly. But really, she just wants to be checked out by them and to check them out. Hey, I don't know. I'm just telling you what's going on. Again, I'm just the messenger. And so with that, George talks to Lenny and he says, hey, for real, Lenny, like Curly is gonna probably try to fight you. Whatever happens, don't take the bait. Don't fall for it. Don't fight him. Like, we need this job. We need to get a stake. S-T-A-K-E. We need to get a stake, i.e. money. I'm assuming a paycheck. Don't mess this up. And what miraculous timing, Curly's wife walks in. She just stands in the doorway saying that she's looking for her husband. George and the old man look away, like they don't look at her at all. But Lenny can't help himself. Like, he can't look away from her and is just staring at her. And she's smiling at him and like, you know, kind of twirling her hair and all this other stuff. And so the second that she leaves, he says, listen to me, you crazy bastard. He said fiercely, don't you even take a look at that bitch. I don't care what she says and what she does. I've seen 'em poison before, but I never seen no piece of jailbait worse than her. You leave her be. I never done nothing, George. No, you never. But when she was standing in that doorway showing her legs, you wasn't looking the other way neither. I meant no harm, George. Honest, I never. Well, you keep away from her, 'cause she's a rat trap if I ever seen one. You let Curly take the rap. Then goes on to tell Lenny, hey, you remember that place where we stayed last night? Like, the clearing. Like, go there if anything happens. If something happens with Curly's wife, if anything bad happens, if you get yourself in trouble, just go there and wait in the bushes for me. Like, don't come out until I get there. Just stay in the bushes if anything happens, okay? And he makes Lenny repeat it multiple times, like a little mantra, so that he'll remember that that's the place to go if something happens. With that, all of the workers come back at the end of the day, and we meet Slim, the prince of the ranch, capable of driving 10, 16, even 20 mules in a single line. Introduces himself. He's a smooth-talking guy. He's really kind, really confident, runs the show. Like, overall good dude. Right, so we meet him, and we meet a guy named Carlson. I know we're getting a lot of people, but each of them are individually actually pretty important, okay? We meet Carlson, who's just another ranch hand. He really doesn't have much importance other than he's just a grumpy bastard in general. So chapter 2 ends with all of the men hanging out in the bunkhouse, having some discussion, and we learn that Slim's dog just had a bunch of babies. So Carlson, the rude ranch hand, he says, hey, Slim, you should give one of your puppies to the old guy. Get rid of his dog. The old guy has this like really old shepherd that is like blind and can't hardly eat. And Carlson says that it smells really, really bad and it doesn't know where it's going half the time. And it's just super, super gross. Like the thing reeks to high heaven. He says anytime that dog comes in here, you smell it for 3 days after. Like that thing is so disgusting. He just needs to put the dog down. So repetitive about how horrible this dog is. So he's like, Slim, you should give one to the old guy so he'll get rid of it. And then upon obviously hearing that there's dogs, that's an option, Lenny is like looking at George so expectantly of like, please, 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 just ask him if we can have one. Please, please, please. Internally, that's what's happening. And then the boys all go off to dinner. In chapter 3, it opens with George thanking Slim for giving Lenny one of his dogs. So Lenny can finally have a dog like he always wanted. George is thanking him. Slim's like, hey, it's no big deal. Like, no need to thank me about that. George said, it wasn't much to you, maybe, but that was a hell of a lot to him. Jesus Christ, I don't know how we're going to get him to sleep in here. He'll want to sleep right out in the barn with them. We'll have trouble keeping him from getting right in the box with them pups. It wasn't nothing, Slim repeated. Say, you sure was right about him. He ain't bright, but I've never seen such a hard worker. He damn near killed his partner Buck and Barley. There ain't nobody can keep up with him. God almighty, I never seen such a strong guy. George spoke proudly. Just tell Lenny what to do, and he'll do it if it don't take no figuring. He can't think of nothing to do for himself, but he sure can take orders. Slim moved back slightly so the light was not on his face. Funny how you and him string along together. It was Slim's calm invitation to confidence. What's funny about it? George demanded defensively. Oh, I don't know. Hardly none of the guys ever travel together. I hardly ever seen 2 guys travel together. You know how the hands are. They just come in and get in their bunk, work for a month, and then they quit and go out alone. Never seem to give a damn about nobody. It just seems kind of funny that a cuckoo like him and a smart little guy like you are traveling together. He ain't no cuckoo, George said. He's dumb as hell, but he ain't crazy. And I ain't so bright neither. Or I wouldn't be bucking barley for my 50 and found. If I was bright, if I even was a little bit smart, I'd have my own little place, and I'd be bringing up my own crop instead of doing the work and not getting what comes out of the ground. George fell silent. It ain't so funny, him and me going around together. Him and me was both born in Auburn. I knowed his Aunt Clara, and she took him in when he was a baby and raised him up. When his Aunt Clara died, Lenny just come along with me out working. Got kind of used to each other after a little while. Said Slim. George looked over at Slim and saw the calm, godlike eyes fastened on him. Funny, said George. I used to have a hell of a lot of fun with him. I used to play jokes on him just because he was too dumb to take care of himself. But he was too dumb to even know he had a joke played on him. I had fun. Made me seem goddamn smart alongside him. Why, he'd do any damn thing I told him to. If I told him to walk off a cliff, over he'd go. That wasn't so damn much funny after a while. He never got mad about it neither. I beat the hell out of him, and he could have bust every bone in my body just with his hands, but he never lifted a finger against me. George's voice was taking on the tone of a confession. Tell you what made me stop. One day, a bunch of guys was standing around on the Sacramento River. I was feeling pretty smart. I turns to Lenny and I says, jump in. And he jumps. Couldn't swim a stroke. He damn near drowned before we could all get him in. He was so damn nice to me for pulling him out. Clean forgot that I told him to jump in. Well, I ain't done nothing like that no more. He's a nice fella, said Slim. Guy don't need no sense to be a nice fella. Seems to me sometimes it just works the other way around. Take a real smart guy and he ain't hardly a nice fella. George said, I've seen the guys that go around on ranches alone. That ain't no good. They don't have no fun. After a long time they get mean, and they've been wanting to fight all the time. Yeah, they do get mean, Slim agreed. They get so they don't want to talk to anybody. Of course, Lenny's a goddamn nuisance most of the time, but you get used to going around with a guy and you can't get rid of him. He ain't mean, said Slim. I can see Lenny ain't a bit mean. Of course he ain't mean. But he gets in trouble all the time because, god damn, he's so dumb. Like what happened in Weed? He stopped in the middle of turning over a card. He looked alarmed and peered over at Slim. You wouldn't tell nobody? What'd he do in Weed? Slim asked calmly. You wouldn't tell? No, of course you wouldn't tell. What'd he do in Weed? Slim asked again. Well, he seen this girl in a red dress. Dumb bastard like he is, wants to touch everything that he likes. Just wants to feel it. So he reaches out to feel his red dress, and the girl lets out a squawk and gets Lenny all mixed up, and so he holds on because that's the only thing that he can think to do. Well, this girl squawks and squawks, and I was just a little off, and I heard the yelling, and so I comes a running, and by that time, Lenny's so scared that all he can think to do is just hold on. I socked him over the head with a fence picket just to make him let go. He was so scared he couldn't let go of that dress, and he's so goddamn strong, you know? Slim's eyes were level and unwinking. He nodded very slowly. So, what happens? Well, that girl rabbits in and tells the law that she'd been raped, and the guys in the weeds start a party out to lynch Lenny, and so we sit in an irrigation ditch underwater for the rest of the day. And that night, we scrammed out of there. Slim sat in silence for a moment. Didn't hurt the girl none, huh? He asked finally. Hell no. He just scared her. I'd be scared too if he grabbed me, but he never hurt her. He just wanted to touch that red dress, like he wants to pet them pups all the time. He ain't mean. I can tell a mean guy a mile off, said Slim. Of course he ain't. Lenny came in through the door. He bore his blue denim coat over his shoulders like a cape and walked hunched way over. And so Lenny comes in and he lays on his bed. He rolls to the side. And George immediately, he's like, Lenny, I told you to not bring that damn dog in here. Lenny's like, I don't have a dog. I don't know what you're talking about. Obviously, he has the dog. And so George sends him back to the barn to put the dog back and goes back to playing cards with Slim. Slim had not moved. His eyes calmly followed Lenny out the door. Jesus, he said, he's just like a kid, ain't he? Sure, he's just like a kid. There ain't no more harm in him than a kid neither, except he's so strong. I bet he won't come in here to sleep tonight. He'd sleep right alongside that box in the barn. Well, let him. He ain't doing no harm out there. So, Candy, they call him a swamper. What is a swamper? Let's find out. Informal term for an assistant worker, helper, or someone who performs odd jobs often in manual labor fields. Okay, so he's just does random stuff around. Okay, that's kind of what I said earlier. He's just like a random ranch guy. He just doesn't do actual ranch stuff because of the whole hand thing. So Candy comes inside. He lays down on his bunk. He's relaxing. You know, Slim and George are just playing cards. And then eventually Carlson comes in. The rude guy, right? Immediately, he lays down and he's like, oh my God, Candy, your dog stinks. Like, that thing is terrible. And now he tells Candy to his face, the old man's face, you need to get rid of that thing. Like, you're doing more harm than good. Thing has a horrible life. Like, he's not doing good. He can't, sorry, I can't break the accent. He's not doing good. He can hardly walk. He can't see anything. He can't eat. Like, you just need to put that thing out of its misery. Just shoot it right in the back of the head. Candy says, no, like, I've had him since he was a pup. Like, he doesn't look like it now, but he used to be a herding dog. And, you know, I've had him for years. Like, I can't do that. Like, he's got life in him still. And Carlson just keeps pestering him about putting the dog down. And eventually Carlson says, I'll just do it for you. If that's what the issue is, if you just don't want to do it yourself, like, I'll do it for you. And Slim will give you a dog. So, like, you'll have a new one and it doesn't matter. Slim confirms that he would, in fact, give the old guy a dog. And Candy looked for help from face to face. It was quite dark outside by now. Candy's, like, looking for help. Like, he just wants somebody to help him tell Carlson to F off, basically. But nobody does, right? It's not really their place. It's not really their business. It's very much the mindset of the ranch hands. And so Carlson brings it up again. Candy says, I don't even know why you're saying this. Like, you ain't even got a gun. Carlson says, like, hell I do. I got a Luger. Candy said, maybe tomorrow. Let's wait till tomorrow. I don't see no reason for it, said Carlson. He went to his bunk, pulled his bag from underneath, and took out the Luger pistol. Let's get it over with. We can't sleep with him stinking around in here. He put the pistol in his hip pocket. Candy looked a long time at Slim to try and figure out some reversal, and Slim gave him none. At last, Candy said softly and hopelessly, all right, take him. He did not look down at the dog at all. He lay back on his bunk and crossed his arms behind his head and stared at the ceiling. From his pocket, Carlson took a little leather thong. He stooped over and tied it around the old dog's neck. All the men except for Candy watched him. Come, boy. Come on, boy, he said gently. He said apologetically to Candy, he won't even feel it. Candy did not move nor answer him. The old dog got slowly and stiffly to his feet and followed the gently pulling leash. Slim said, Carlson, yeah? You know what to do. What do you mean, Slim? Take a shovel, said Slim shortly. Oh, sure, I get you. He led the dog out into the darkness. George followed to the door and shut the door and the latch gently in its place. Candy lay rigidly on his bed, staring at the ceiling. So a couple minutes go by, and it's just this awkward, horrible silence while everybody's, like, waiting for the inevitable. Eventually it happens, right? They hear the gunshot in the distance, and everybody's head snaps to Candy to see his reaction. All he does is roll over to the wall. No more words are said. He doesn't say anything more. Oh, that's so sad. Another ranch hand comes in and starts to play cards with George. Slim goes out, check on Lenny, because I guess he's, like, playing with the pups way too much. So he leaves, and then this new stable hand guy and George are having a conversation. And the conversation turns toward, hey, on the weekends, we go into town and we go to, I think it's not Carla's. Carla's is the bad one. And they go to Old Susie's place. And Old Susie's place is a place for sex work, right? Like, you pay for ladies. and you drink and you just hang out, and they just like talk about going there on the weekends and how much it costs, and it's a pretty good deal. And they talk about the other one, Carla's, and how hers isn't as good, and like blah 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 blah, and it's just like locker room talk about women. Eventually Lenny comes back because he got sent away by Slim, so he's back in the room, he's hanging out, and then Curly comes busting in, the boss's son. He comes in and he's like, have y'all seen my wife? They say, no, we don't know where she is. Like, no, we haven't seen her. He's like, where's Slim at? He's out in the barn. How long has Slim been gone? Like 5-10 minutes. I don't know. He's doing horse stuff. He's like, he had to put tar on one of the hooves. That's the other reason that his horse had a whatever hoof problem, and to check on Lenny and get him to come back. So anyway, so they're out there doing horse stuff. And so Curly, I guess the assumption is that his wife is hooking up with Slim in the barn. So Curly goes storming over there. Good God. So Curly goes storming over there, and all of the other stable hands follow, right? Carlson, the other guy that they were playing cards with, and the other dude. They all leave. So the only people that are left in the bunkhouse are Lenny, George, and then the old guy who is on his bed super sad about his dog dying, or his dog getting shot, right? Lenny drummed on the table with his fingers. George, how long is it going to be till we get that little place to live on the fat of the land and rabbits? It's the fat of the land and rabbits, but it is spelled like FTTA, the LAN apostrophe, AN apostrophe. So live on the fat of the land and is the fat of the land and blah, 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 right? That's how all of the writing is very like, I'm using a Southern accent because it's like how it is written to me. I'm not just like being weird. I'm like trying to read the freaking writing, and that is the only way that it comes out of my mouth. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Lenny is asking George about how long until they're able to get this piece of land that they can live on and have the rabbits and everything. I don't know, said George. I know a little place that we can get cheap, but they ain't giving it away. Old Candy turned over slowly. His eyes were wide open. He watched George carefully. Lenny said, tell me about that place, George. I just told you just last night. Go on, tell again, George. Well, it's 10 acres. Got a little windmill and a little shack on it and a chicken run. Got a kitchen, an orchard, cherries, apples, peaches, cots, nuts, and a few berries. There's a place for alfalfa and plenty of water to flood it, and there's a pig pen and rabbits, George. No place for rabbits now, but I could easily build a few hutches and you could feed alfalfa to the rabbits. Damn right I could, said Lenny. You goddamn right I could. George's hands stopped working the cards, his voice growing warmer. And we could have a few pigs, and I could build a smokehouse just like the ones Grandpa had, and when we kill a pig, we can smoke up the bacon and the hams and make sausages and all of that, and when the salmon run up river, we could catch 100 of them and salt them down or smoke them. We could have them for breakfast. They ain't nothing so nice as smoked salmon. When the fruit come in, we can can it, and tomatoes, they're easy to can. Every Sunday, we'd kill a chicken or a rabbit. Maybe we'd have a cow or a goat, and the cream is so goddamn thick you could cut it with a knife. Or take it out with a spoon. Lenny watched him with wide eyes, and Old Candy watched him too. Lenny said softly, we could live off the fat of the land. Sure, said George. All kinds of vegetables in the garden, and if we want a little whiskey, we can sell a few eggs or something, or some milk, and we'd just live there. We'd belong there. There wouldn't be no more running and around the country and getting fed. This is I'm assuming this is like a derogatory term, so I'm not going to say it. By a cook? No, sir. We'd have our own place where we belonged and not sleep in no bunkhouse. This is the problem. Sorry. What was I going to read on Spotify? I was going to read, not White Fang, but the other one, maybe Call of the Wild by Jack London. And I was like reading through it and I was like, ooh, I don't know what these words are, but I feel like these are slurs. I feel like these are derogatory terms, and it's all written in such old English that I'm like, I don't know for sure, so I'm just not gonna say it. I'm like finding that problem a lot lately with these like the non-copyright stuff, or the things that are out of copyright due to their age, also contain a lot of mysterious words that I can only imagine what they actually mean, and I don't want to risk that one. So anyway, it's a real problem. That's the one crappy part about reading these classics and stuff, is the amount that you just have to not accept, but you have to tolerate the inherent racism and mistreatment of people of color and women and like everybody pretty much. Obviously, particularly people of color, but you know what I'm saying. It's just like, bad across the board. Anyway, we'd have our own place where we'd belonged and not sleep in no bunkhouse. Tell about the house, George, Lenny begged. Sure. We'd have a little house and a room to ourselves, a little fat iron stove, and in the winter we'd keep the fire going in it. It ain't enough land, so we'd have to work too hard, maybe 6-7 hours a day, and we wouldn't have to buck no barley 11 hours a day. And when we put in a crop, why, we'd be there to take the crop up. We'd know what would come of our planting. And rabbits? Lenny said eagerly, and I take care of them. And tell how I do that, George. Sure. You'd go out to the alfalfa patch and you'd have a sack. You'd fill up the sack and you'd bring it in and you'd put it in the rabbit cages. They'd nibble and they'd nibble and they'd nibble the way that they do. I seen them. Every 6 weeks or so, them does would throw a litter and we'd have plenty of rabbits to eat and to sell. And we'd keep a few pigeons flying around the windmill just like they done when I was a kid. He looked raptly at the wall over Lenny's head. And it'd be our own. And nobody could can us. If we don't like a guy, we can say, get the hell out, and by God, he's got to do it. And if a friend come along the way, why, we'd have an extra bunk, and we'd say, why don't you spend the night? And by God, he would. We'd have a setter dog and a couple of striped cats, but you gotta watch out, them cats don't get the little rabbits. Lenny breathed hard. You just let them try to get the rabbits, and I'll break their goddamn necks. I'll smash them with a stick. He subsided, grumbling to himself, threatening the future cats, which might dare to disturb the future rabbits. George sat entranced with his own picture. When Candy spoke, they both jumped as though they had been caught doing something reprehensible. Candy said, you know where there's a place like that? George was on guard immediately. Suppose I do. What's it to you? You don't need to tell me where it's at. It might be any place. Sure, said George. That's right. You couldn't find it in 100 years. Candy went on excitedly. How much do they want for a place like that? George watched him suspiciously. Well, I could get it for $600. The old people that owns it is flat bust and the old lady needs an operation. Say, what's it to you? You ain't got nothing to do with us. Candy said, I ain't much good with only one hand. Lost my hand right here on this ranch. That's why they gave me a job swamping. And they give me $250 because I lost my hand. And I got 50 more saved up right now in the bank. That's $300, and I got 50 more coming at the end of the month. I'll tell you what. He leaned forward eagerly. Suppose I went in with you guys. That's $350 that I'd put in. I ain't much good, but I could cook and tend the chickens and hoe the garden some. How'd that be? George half closed his eyes. I gotta think about that. We was always gonna do it by ourselves. Candy interrupted him. I'd make a will and leave my share to you guys in case I kick off, because I ain't got no relatives or nothing. You guys got any money? Maybe we could do it right now. George spat on the floor disgustedly. We got $10 between us. Then he said thoughtfully, look, if me and Lenny work a month and don't spend nothing, we'll have $100, and that'd be $450, and I bet we could swing her for that, and then you and Lenny could get her started, and I'd get a job and make up the rest, and y'all could sell eggs and stuff like that. They fell into silence. They looked at one another, amazed. This thing they had never really believed in was coming true. George said reverently, Jesus Christ, I bet we could swing her. His eyes full of wonder. I bet we could swing her, he repeated softly. Candy sat on the edge of his bed. He scratched the stump of his wrist nervously. I got hurt 4 years ago, he said. They'll can me here pretty soon, just as soon as I don't swamp out no bunkhouses. They'll put me on the county, and maybe if I give you guys my money, you'll let me hoe the garden, even after I ain't no good at it, and I'll wash the dishes and little chicken stuff like that. But I'll be on our own place, and I'll be let to work on our own pace, he said miserably. You seen what they done to my dog tonight? They says he was no good to himself or nobody else. When they canned me here, I wish somebody'd shoot me, but they won't do nothing like that. I won't have no place to go. I can't get no more jobs. I'll have $30 more coming time you guys is ready to quit. George stood up. We'll do her, he said. We'll fix up that little old place and we'll go live there. He sat down again. They all sat still, bemused by the beauty of the thing. Each mind was popped into the future when this lovely thing should come about. George said wonderingly, suppose there was a carnival or a circus coming to town or a ball game or any damn thing. Old Candy nodded in appreciation of the idea. We'd just get to go to her. We wouldn't ask nobody if we could, just say, we'll go to her. And we would. Just milk the cow and sling some grain to the chickens and go to her. And put some grass to the rabbits, Lenny broke in. I would never forget to feed them. We gonna do it, George? In 1 month. Right? Squawk in 1 month. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna write them old people who owns that place that will take it, and Candy will send $100 to bind her. By that time, all of the guys are coming back inside, and George swears Lenny to secrecy. He's like, hey, for real, don't repeat any of this, Lenny. Like, this is a secret, because they'll fire us if they know that we're planning on leaving. Like, we just need to keep it through this month and just act like we'll do this forever and just earn money, okay? And that's the plan. So all the guys come back inside, right? We got Slim, Carlson, the other stable hand, and Curly is with them also. And Curly is apologizing to Slim for accusing him of like sleeping with his wife or whatever. And I guess he was trying to pick a fight with Slim earlier, and it just, I don't know, whatever happened. And so Curly is now still apologizing to Slim and still a little pissed off. And so when he spots Lenny smiling, because Lenny is thinking about his rabbits and he's just like happy thoughts and smirking, Curly thinks that Lenny is laughing at him. So Curly says, "I'll be damned if a big motherfucker like you laughs at me," and starts to fight Lenny. Like, just starts swinging on the dude, just like beating the absolute crap out of him. And Lenny, wanting to not be bad and not cause trouble, doesn't fight back or block anything. He like literally just has his hands at his sides, like crying, and it's really horrifically sad. And so George is yelling. He's like, "Just get him, Lenny. Like, you can do it. Just fight back. Like, you can do it. It's okay." Finally, he gets through to him. Lenny hears George say this. So Lenny grabs Curly's hand and just holds it. That's all he does. And Curly just drops to the ground and starts flopping like a fish, is the description. Just keeps holding his hand and can't let go of it. George has to literally go over and like slap Lenny senseless before he comes to, I guess, or like acknowledges any of the rest of the world, and lets go of Curly's hand. And it is like mangled so badly, like doesn't even look like a hand anymore. Slim is like, "Oh my god, I'm pretty sure every bone in his hand is broken." Lenny is freaking out because he's like, "George, I'm so sorry. Like, I didn't do nothing bad. Like, it was an accident. Like, I didn't mean to do it." Like, he's super, super sad. And George is like, "Hey, you didn't do anything bad. He started it. Like, you're okay. Everything's fine." But he is worried about them losing their jobs. And so he asks Slim that. He's like, "You think we're going to lose work over this?" So Slim gets down on the floor looking over Curly, who is like distraught because of the pain that he's in, right? Like, he's only like half engaged with the world. Like, he is like blacking out because of just how broken his hand is. So Slim, right, gets some sense into him. He's looking at Curly and he's like, "Man, Curly, that's crazy. You got your hand stuck in a machine and you had that accident happen, right? That's a real terrible thing to happen. And man, if you said anything else, if you brought up anything, if you insinuate that Lenny hurt your hand, we'd have to tell everybody how you let him beat the shit out of you. And that's pretty embarrassing, huh? You wouldn't want everybody to know that and laugh at you. So that machine accident, huh?" And it's like, god damn, this dude would rather say that than admit he got beat up. And that's kind of the whole point of his character, right? He's a douchebag. He's super, super insecure and like overboard with trying to express his masculinity to like be cool to people. It's like little guy syndrome, you know what I mean? So they end up having to take Curly to the hospital because his hand is that mangled. It's like, Jesus Christ. Slim and Curly and one of the other guys, they all hop in like the wagon and go and take him off to the hospital or something. George turned to Lenny. "It ain't your fault," he said. "You don't need to be scared no more. You just done what I told you. Maybe you'd better go to the washroom and clean up your face, though. You look like hell." Lenny smiled with his bruised mouth. I didn't want no trouble," he said. He walked toward the door, but just before he came to it, he turned back. "George, what do you want?" "I can still tend rabbits, George." "Sure, you ain't done nothing wrong." "I didn't mean no harm, George." "Well, get the hell out and go wash your face." So, in chapter 4, we are introduced in pretty detail about Crooks, who is the black man. We're told about his living situation. Like I said, he lives in different quarters than the rest of the guys. Like, he's not allowed in their bunkhouse, and so he says that they're not allowed in his room either. Chapter 4 just opens up describing his room in a lot of detail. It also goes on to describe how Lenny just shows up and stands in the doorway. All of the guys went to town to go to the whatever's place, Sarah's place, Sally's place, I don't know, to go and like drink and do stuff with women. And so it's just Lenny that's left behind. It's Lenny, the old guy, and then obviously Crooks, right? They're the only ones that are left on the farm. So Lenny's visiting because he came in to play with the puppies and he saw Crooks's light on. So he's standing in the doorway and they're talking. And eventually Crooks ends up inviting Lenny into his room. So he sits down and he's talking because Lenny just like won't leave and he doesn't really say anything. And so Crooks just keeps talking and he's realizing like, okay, you really have no idea what's going on. Like, you're not even registering anything that I'm saying to you. Because he would talk for a little bit and then Lenny would just go back to asking about the puppies in the other room or like asking another question again, like something he already asked. And so Crooks is putting it together at like, no wonder George likes having you around. He could just say anything to you. He could say anything at all. He says, It don't mean nothing, see? You wouldn't remember anyways. I seen it over and over, a guy talking to another guy. It don't make no difference if he don't hear or understand. The thing is, they're talking and they're talking, or they're setting and still not talking. It don't make no difference. No difference. His excitement increased until he pounded his knee with his hand. George can tell you screwy things and it don't matter. It's just talking. It's just been with another guy. That's all. He paused. And then he goes on to say, like, what would you do if George didn't come back? Like, what if George just went into town and he just leaves you forever and doesn't come back? And Lenny starts to get very upset about this idea, like crying. And he's like, he wouldn't do that to me. Like, he's coming back. He's coming back. He's coming back. Like, Crooks keeps pushing him. And he's like, yeah, okay, so what if he like died though? Like, yeah, you think he'd come back, but what if something happened and he just like can't come back to you? Like, then what would you do? And that pisses Lenny off. He's like, nobody would hurt George. Like, nobody can hurt him. Nobody can touch him. Like, that can't happen. Getting really, really worked up. Crooks is realizing this is a little bit of a dangerous situation because Lenny keeps like approaching him on his bed and it's just like not really a good time. And so he says, I'm just kidding. Like, he's fine. Crooks removed his glasses and wiped his eyes with his fingers. Just sit down, he said. George ain't hurt. Lenny growled back to his seat. Ain't nobody gonna talk no hurt to George, he grumbled. Crooks said gently, maybe you can see now. You got George. You know he's gonna come back. Suppose you didn't have nobody. Suppose you couldn't go into the bunkhouse and play rummy because he was black. How'd you like that? Suppose you had to sit out here and read books. Sure, you could play horseshoes till it got dark, but then you had to read books. Books ain't no good. A guy needs somebody to be near him, he whined. A guy goes nuts if he ain't got nobody. Don't make no difference who the guy is as long as he's with you. I tell you, he cried. I tell you, a guy gets too lonely. He just gets sick. George is gonna come back, Lenny reassured himself in a frightened voice. Maybe George came back already. Maybe I better go see. Crooks said, I didn't mean to scare you. He'll come back. I was just talking about myself. A guy sits alone out here at night, maybe reading books or thinking of stuff like that. Sometimes he gets thinking and ain't got nothing to tell him what's so and what ain't so. Maybe if he sees something and he don't know whether it's right or not, and he can't turn to some other guy and ask if he sees it too. He can't tell. He got nothing to measure by. I seen things out here. I wasn't drunk, and I don't know if I was asleep. If some guy was with me, he could tell me if I was asleep, and then it would be all right. But I just don't know. Crooks was looking across the room now, looking toward the window. Lenny said miserably, George won't go away and leave me. I know George won't do that. I remember when I was a little kid on my old man's chicken ranch. I had 2 brothers. They were always near me, always there. They used to sleep right in the same room, right in the same bed, all 3. Had a strawberry patch. Had an alfalfa patch. I used to turn the chickens out in the alfalfa on a Sunday morning. My brothers sat on a fence rail, watch 'em. White chickens they was. Gradually, Lenny's interests came around to what was being said. George says we're gonna have alfalfa for the rabbits. What rabbit? We're gonna have rabbits in a berry patch. You're nuts. We are too. Just ask George. You're nuts. Crooks was scornful. I seen hundreds of men come by on that road on the ranches with their bindles on their back and the same damn thing in their heads. Hundreds of them. They come and they quit and they go on, and every damn one of them's got a little piece of land in their head, and never a goddamn one of them ever gets it. Just like heaven. Everybody wants a little piece of land. I read plenty of books out there. Nobody never gets to heaven, and nobody gets no land. It's all just in their head. They're all just talking about it, but it's all just in their head. He paused and looked toward the open door, for the horses were moving restlessly, and the halter chain clinked. A horse whined. He pulled himself painfully upright and moved toward the door. That you, Slim? He called. Candy's voice answered. Slim went into town. You seen Lenny? You mean the big guy? Yeah, you seen him around any place? He's in here. Candy comes and stands in the doorway, and he says, Tell you what, Lenny, I've been thinking about them rabbits. Crooks said irritably, You can come in if you want. Candy seemed embarrassed. I don't know. Of course, if you want me to. Come on in. If everybody's coming in, you might just as well. It was difficult for Crooks to conceal his pleasure with anger. Candy came in, but was still embarrassed. You got a nice cozy place in here, he said to Crooks. Must be nice to have a room all yourself this way. Sure, Crooks said, in a manure pile under the window. Sure, it's swell. To be clear, Crooks is very excited to finally have somebody who is actually talking to him or actually listening to him, even though Lenny technically isn't or isn't comprehending what's happening. It doesn't really matter because Crooks is incredibly lonely because racism, right? It's an interesting perspective. And so this, again, goes into some of the issues that people have in the classrooms of talking about this book or reading this book for class. Because it is, on one hand, we're using derogatory terms and you're like bringing up the plight of a black man when you are just some white dude, right? And also like using slurs like that so casually, obviously, is one concerning aspect. However, also in doing so, the counter argument to that being, Crooks is very clearly talking about the issues of like how he is treated so poorly and isolated from people and how sad he is. It is just a very nuanced conversation that needs to be had, and I think especially in classrooms, obviously if it's done correctly and appropriately, just in a very general level, I think that there needs to be, I feel like we shouldn't have to teach empathy, but goddamn does it feel like it. I feel like if everybody just gave a little bit more of a shit about how other people feel about things or other people's perspectives, or like realizing, wow, that's actually like another human being with thoughts and feelings like I have. Maybe they feel bad if we treat people like crap, or maybe these people shouldn't be isolated and treated poorly and treated differently because of X, Y, and Z. Maybe we just shouldn't be fucking douchebags to each other. But apparently that's a radical idea. That's a crazy idea. Why would I even think such a thing? Anyway, but yes, so that's a conversation, right? So Crooks is now also, when Candy comes in and he comes into his room, and this is the first time that he's ever had visitors in his room, he's trying to pretend that he's still angry, but he's actually enjoying the attention. Like, he's enjoying being part of something. Continuing the conversation, Lenny is like, hey, what about the rabbits? Candy, what about them? What are you talking about? Candy says, I got it figured out. We can make some money on the rabbits if we go about it right. But I get to tend to him, Lenny broke in. George says I get to tend to them. He promised. Crooks interrupted brutally. You guys is just kidding yourselves. You'll talk about it a hell of a lot, but you won't get no land. You'll be a swamper hero till they take you out in a box. Hell, I seen too many guys, Lenny. Lenny here will quit and be on the road. In 2-3 weeks, it seems like every guy got land in his head. Candy rubbed his cheek angrily. You goddamn right we're gonna do it. George says we are, so we got the money right now. Yeah, said Crooks. And where's George now? In town in a whorehouse. That's where your money's going. Jesus, I've seen it happen too many times. I've seen too many guys with land in their head. They never get none under their hand. Candy cried, sure, they all want it. Everybody wants a little land. Not much, just something that was his. Something that he could live on, and there couldn't be nobody to throw him off of it. I never had one. I planted crops for damn near everybody in this state, but they wasn't my crops. And I harvested them, but it wasn't none of my harvest. But we gonna do it now. And you don't make no mistake about that. George ain't got no money in town. That money's in the bank. Me and Lenny and George, we're gonna have a room for ourselves. We're gonna have dogs and rabbits and chickens, and we're gonna have green corn and maybe a cow or a goat. He stopped, overwhelmed with his picture. Crook said, you say you got money? Damn right, we got most of it. It's just a little bit more to get. Have it all in 1 month. George got all the land picked out too. Crooks reached around and explored his spine with his hand. I never seen a guy really do it, he said. I seen guys nearly crazy with loneliness for land, but every time a whorehouse or a blackjack game took what it takes. He hesitated. If you guys would want a hand to work for nothing, just as keep, why, I'd come and lend a hand. I ain't so crippled I can't work like a son of a bitch if I want to. And then Curly's wife appears in the doorway saying, have any of you boys seen Curly? And is overtly flirting with them and overtly trying to flirt with Lenny for beating up her husband. They keep trying to deny it, and they're like, yeah, it was a machine accident. I don't know what you're talking about. She sees Lenny's black eye and she's like, a machine accident? Sure. Like, thanks for beating him up though. He kind of deserves it. And has this back and forth. Candy is being very, very rude to her and dismissive and like telling her to get lost. And she keeps pushing back. And she's like, don't you think I'm lonely? I can't have any friends. I'm just cooped up in that house all day. Like, I have nobody to talk to. Like, I don't do anything. Like, every time I talk to one of you guys are just mean to me. Crooks interrupts the conversation upon hearing that. And he says, you got a husband. I don't want to hear you tell me about being lonely. And she turns around and starts calling him the N-word. And she says, know your place. I could have you lynched in a heartbeat, like faster than you could blink an eye. Like, don't tempt me. And so he goes into his like walled up stoic mode, completely emotionless responses, and just says like, yes ma'am. She continues to berate him. He's just not reacting to it at all and just saying, yes, ma'am. Eventually she leaves because he's not giving her a reaction that she was wanting, because she was wanting to inflict some type of pain on him. And now she like is not getting the reaction she wants. So she leaves finally. Crooks avoided the whole subject now. Maybe you guys better go, he said. I ain't sure I want you in here no more. A colored man gotta have some rights even if he don't like them. Candy said, that bitch ought to not have said that to you. It wasn't nothing, Crooks said dully. You guys coming in and sitting made me forget. What she says is true. The horses snorted out in the barn and the chains rang and a voice called, Lenny, oh Lenny, are you in the barn? It's George, Lenny cried. He answered, Here, George, I'm right in here. In a second, George stood in the frame and he looked disapprovingly about. What are you doing in Crook's room? You hadn't ought to be in here. Crooks nodded. I told them, but they come in anyways. Well, why didn't you kick him out? I didn't care much, said Crooks. Lenny's a nice fella. Now Candy aroused himself. Oh, George, I've been figuring. I got it all doped out. How we can even make some money on them rabbits. George scowled. I thought I told you not to tell nobody about that. Candy, crestfallen. I didn't tell nobody but Crooks. George said, well, you guys ought to get out of here. Jesus, seems like I can't go away for a minute. Candy and Lenny stood up and went toward the door, and Crooks called, Candy, huh? Remember what I said about hoeing and doing odd jobs? Yeah? Candy said, I remember. Well, just forget it, said Crooks. I didn't mean it. I was just fooling. I wouldn't want to go no place like that. Well, okay, if you feel like that. Good night. The three men went out of the door. As they went through the barn, the horses snorted and the halter chains rattled. Crooks sat on his bunk and looked at the door a moment, and then he reached for the liniment bottle. He pulled out his shirt back, poured a little liniment in his pink palm, and reaching around, he fell slowly to rubbing his back, which is what he was doing in the beginning of the chapter before Lenny came in there. That makes me want to cry. I want to cry so badly. He was so excited to have friends and get out of them freaking miserable living in a separate quarters thing. And that racist bitch had to come in there and ruin his dream. And it makes me so, like, that's already so sad. And we still have 2 chapters where everything is just going to get so much worse. In chapter 5, it's Sunday morning. It's the next morning, and Lenny is in the barn playing with the dog, playing with his new puppy, and he ends up petting it too hard and killing it. And he's really upset about it, understandably, because now he's like, now I can't tend to rabbits. Like, why'd you have to go and be so tiny and be dead? Like, why did you have to get killed? Like, mad at the dog for dying, right? Not necessarily understanding his actions or understanding his actions to a degree. So he tries to hide the little pup under the hay because he doesn't want George to find out about it. And then he's like, okay, well, this isn't that bad of a thing. Like, I don't need to go out to the bush for this. Like, he'll understand. Like, I can just say I found the dog and it was dead. Like, I can do something. And he's thinking through all of these ways how he can get around telling George what happened when Curly's wife comes in. Okay. Curly and all of the boys are outside. They're playing like a game of horseshoes. Like, it's a very competitive game of horseshoes. And so it's literally just the two of them. And she approaches him and she's like, puts on the moves. She's like, yeah, she sees the dead dog. Hey, hold on. She does acknowledge the dead puppy, by the way. She sees it and he's like, yeah, whatever. They move on from it pretty quickly. And she ends up also talking to him in the same way that Crooks did. When she realizes that he's not really registering what's happening and he's just kind of like a soundboard, she goes on talking about her life and how lonely she is and how horrible Curly is and how she's not happy and she could have been somebody and she could have done something, and how she talked to this one guy and he said how she was so talented that she could have been in the pictures, like she could have been on the movies and stuff, and just goes on and on about how sad she is. She brings a conversation around again to the dog and asking how it passed away, and he was saying how he just kept petting it because it was so soft. And she says, well, my hair is really soft. My hair is so soft, like you should feel it. He does. He feels her hair, and then she starts to get frustrated with him and starts to yell at him to not mess her hair up because he's like trying to run his fingers through it, and she's like, you're gonna mess it up, so that starts to freak him out. And so he ends up gripping her hair very hard. She starts screaming because of this. He covers her mouth because he's like, hey, stop screaming. Like, George ain't gonna let me have rabbits if you keep screaming. Like, I'm not gonna be able to tend to rabbits if you keep yelling like this. There's a lot of back and forth. He ends up accidentally killing her, like snaps her neck, okay? So now he's faced with killing the pup and killing Curly's wife, and he doesn't know what to do. He just knows that he messed up. And so he makes a break to go to the bushes, to go to the clearing and go and hide until George comes and gets him. This poor guy. Oh, God. I done a real bad thing. He said, I shouldn't have did that. George will be mad. And he said, and hide in the bush until he comes. He's going to be mad. In the bush until he comes. That's what he said. Lenny went back and looked at the dead girl. The puppy lay close to her. Lenny picked it up. I'll throw him away, he said. It's bad enough like it is. He put the pup under his coat and he crept to the barn wall and peered out between the cracks toward the horseshoe game. And then he crept around the end of the last manger and disappeared. Outside, the men's voices became louder and clearer. And from around the end of the last old stall, Candy's voice came. Lenny, he yelled. Oh, Lenny, are you in here? I've been figuring some more. Tell you what we can do, Lenny. Old Candy appeared from around the last stall. Oh, Lenny, he called again. And then he stopped, and his body stiffened. He rubbed his smooth wrist on his white stubble whiskers. I didn't know you was in here, he said to Curly's wife. When she didn't answer, he stepped nearer. You oughtn't to be sleeping out here, he said disapprovingly. And then he was beside her and, oh, Jesus Christ. He looked about helplessly. He rubbed his beard, and then he jumped up and went quickly out of the barn. He goes and gets George and shows George the body. They both know that obviously it was Lenny. Candy says, what are we going to do now, George? What are we going to do now? George was a long time in answering. I guess we got to tell the guys. I guess we got to get him and lock him up. We can't let him get away. Why, the poor bastard to starve. He tried to reassure himself. Maybe they'll lock him up and be nice to him. But Candy said excitedly, we ought to let him get away. You don't know that, Curly. Curly's gonna want to get him lynched. Curly will kill him. George watched Candy's lips. Yeah, that's right. Curly will. And the other guys will. Now Candy spoke, his greatest fear. You and me can get that little place, can't we, George? You and me can go and live in the nice place, can't we, George? Can't we? Before George answered, Candy dropped his head and looked down at the hay. He knew. George said softly, I think I knowed from the very first. I think I knowed that we'd never do her. He used to like to hear about it so much I just got to thinking that maybe we would. Then it's all off? Candy asked sulkily. George didn't answer the question. George said, I'll work my month and I'll take my $50 and I'll stay the night in some lousy cat house, or I'll get in some pool room till everybody goes home, and then I'll come back and work another month and then I'll have $50 more. Candy said, he's such a nice fella. I didn't think he'd do nothing like this. George stared at Curly's wife. Lenny never done it in meanness. All the time he'd done bad things, but he'd never done any of them mean. He straightened and looked back up at Candy. Now listen, we gotta tell the guys. They gotta bring him in, I guess. They ain't no way out. Maybe they won't hurt him. I ain't gonna let them hurt Lenny. Now you listen. The guys might think I was in on it, so I'm gonna go in the bunkhouse, and then in a minute you come out, you tell the guys about her, and then I'll come along and I'll make it look like I never seen her. Will you do that so the guys won't think I was in on it? They say yes. And so that's the plan. Right? Everything happens. All of the guys are back in the barn looking at Curly's wife, realizing that she's dead. And immediately Curly is like, it was that big son of a bitch. Like, I know exactly who it was. Like, we're going to go and get him. So Curly goes and gets his gun. Carlson is going to go and get his Luger, the same one that he used to shoot the dog, right? He's going to go and get the Luger. And then Crooks has a shotgun. So Crooks is running to go and get his shotgun as well. And they're all going to come back together and then go on a little search party to try and find Lenny. So Slim is talking to George and he's like, do you know where he would have gone? And Lenny says, yeah, we came in from the north, so he probably went south. Like, he wouldn't have gone back the way we came. And he goes on to say, couldn't we bring him in and they'll lock him up? He's nuts, Slim. He's never done this to be mean. Slim nodded. We might. If we could keep Curly in, we might, but Curly's going to want to shoot him. Curly's still mad about his hand, and suppose they lock him up and strap him down and put him in a cage. That ain't no good, George. I know, said George, I know. Carlson came running in. The bastard stole my Luger, he shouted. It ain't in my bag. Curly followed him with the shotgun. And so Carlson's gun is gone. And George is like, maybe you lost it, dude. Carlson says, no, I saw it this morning. He took my gun, blah, blah, blah. And so then they all go out on the manhunt to try and find Lenny. In chapter 6, we're back at the clearing where the book began, and Lenny is hiding in the bushes. Lenny comes out from the bushes, he's drinking some water, and he starts to hallucinate a little bit. And he sees a vision of his Aunt Clara, and she is, I was gonna say chiding him. That's not a word I ever use. She is yelling at him basically for dragging George down and for being a burden, and like just continues to berate him of like, yeah, you didn't mean it to be mean, but you still did it, and you always do bad things. And then he sees a vision of a giant rabbit, and the giant rabbit is saying the same thing. The giant rabbit is like, you were never good enough to take care of us. Like, you would have forgot to feed us. Like, I don't know why you ever thought that you'd be able to take care of rabbits, Lenny. Like, you stupid bastard. Horrible, saying like every horrible thing that he's ever heard. He's like seeing these visions speak it back to him. And he's like crying. So Lenny is responding now to the hallucinations, right? He's responding to this giant rabbit saying that he would forget to feed them. He starts yelling. He's like, I would not forget to feed him. And the rabbit says, like hell you would. You definitely would. And George is going to be pissed at you. Like, he's going to beat you with a stick. Like, he's going to beat the piss out of you. Like, George would never do nothing like that. I knew George since I forget when, but he ain't never raised no hand to me or with a stick. He's nice to me. He ain't gonna be mean. Well, he's sick of you, the rabbit said. He's gonna beat the hell out of you and then go away and leave you. He won't, Lenny cried frantically. He won't do nothing like that. I know George. Me and him travels together. But the rabbit repeated softly over and over, he's gonna leave you, you crazy bastard. He's gonna leave you all alone. He's gonna leave you, you crazy bastard. Lenny put his hands to his ears. He ain't, I tell you, he ain't, he cried. Oh, George, 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 he's yelling. George quietly came out of the brush, and the rabbit scuttled back into Lenny's brain. George said quietly, what the hell are you yelling about? Lenny got up on his knees. You ain't gonna leave me, are you, George? I know you ain't. George came stiffly near and sat beside him. No, I knowed it, Lenny cried. You ain't that kind. George was silent. Lenny said, George? Yeah, I done another bad thing. It don't make no difference, George said, and he fell silent again. Only the topmost ridges were in snow now. The shadow in the valley was blue and soft, and from the distance came the sound of men shouting to one another. George turned his head and listened to the shouts. Lenny said, George? Yeah? You ain't gonna give me hell? Give you hell? Sure, like you always done before. If I didn't have you, I'd have my $50. Jesus Christ, Lenny. You can't remember nothing that happens, but you remember every word I say? Well, ain't you gonna say it? George shook himself. He said woodenly, if I was alone, I could live so easy. His voice was monotonous. No emphasis. I could get a job and have no mess. He stopped. Go on, said Lenny. And when the end of the month come, I could take my $50 and go to a cat house. He stopped again. Lenny looked at him eagerly. Go on, George. Ain't you gonna give me no more hell? No, said George. Well, I can go away, said Lenny. I'll go right off in the hills and find a cave if you don't want me. George shook himself again. No, I want you to stay with me here. Lenny said craftily, tell me like you done before. Tell you what? About the other guys and about us. George said, guys like us got no family. They make a little stake and then they blow in it. They ain't got nobody in the world that gives a hoot in hell about 'em. But not us, Lenny cried happily. Tell us now. George was quiet for a moment. But not us, he said. Because I got you and I got you. We got each other, and that's what gives a hoot in hell about us, Lenny cried in triumph. The little evening breeze blew over the clearing, and the leaves rustled in the wind. Waves flowed up the green pool, and the shouts of men sounded again, this time much closer than before. George took off his hat. He said shakily, take off your hat, Lenny. The air feels fine. Lenny removed his hat dutifully and laid it on the ground in front of him. The shadow in the valley was bluer, and the evening came fast. On the wind, the sound of crashing in the brush came to them. Lenny said, tell how it's going to be. George had been listening to the distant sounds. For a moment, he was businesslike. Look across the river, Lenny, and I'll tell you so you can almost see it. Lenny turned his head and looked off across the pool, up the darkening slopes of the mountains. We're going to get a little place, George began. He reached in his side pocket and brought out Carlson's Luger. He snapped off the safety, and the hand and the gun lay on the ground behind Lenny's back. He looked at the back of Lenny's head, at the place where the spine and the skull were joined. A man's voice called from up the river. Another man answered. Go on, said Lenny. George raised the gun, and his hand shook. He dropped his hand to the ground again. Go on, said Lenny. How's it going to be? We're going to get a little place. We'll have a cow, said George, and maybe a pig, and chickens, and down the flat, we'll have a little piece alfalfa. For the rabbits, Lenny shouted. For the rabbits, George repeated. And I get to tend to the rabbits. And you get to tend to the rabbits. Lenny giggled with happiness. And live on the fat of the land. Yes. Lenny turned his head. No, Lenny. Look down across the river, like you can almost see the place. Lenny obeyed him. George looked down at the gun. There were crashing footsteps in the brush now. George turned and looked toward them. Go on, George. When are we going to do it? We're going to do it soon. Me and you? You and me. Everybody going to be nice to you. Oh my God, I can't do this. I literally cried over this earlier today. I can't do this. You and me. Everybody going to be nice to you. Ain't going to be no more trouble. Nobody gonna hurt nobody, nor steal from them. Lenny said, I thought you was mad at me, George. No, said George. No, Lenny, I ain't mad. I ain't never been mad, and I ain't now. That's a thing I want you to know. The voices came close now. George raised the gun and listened to the voices. Lenny begged, let's do it now. Let's go to that place now. Sure. Right now. We gotta. And George raised the gun and steadied it. He brought the muzzle of it close to Lenny's head. The hand shook violently, but his face set and his hand steadied. He pulled the trigger. The crash of the shot rolled up the hills and rolled down again. Lenny jarred and then settled slowly forward in the sand. He lay without quivering. George shivered and looked at the gun. and then he threw it from him, back up on the bank near the pile of old ashes. The brush seemed filled with cries and the sounds of running feet. Slim's voice shouted, "George, where are you?" But George sat stiffly on the bank and looked at his right hand that had thrown the gun away. The group burst into the clearing, and Curly was ahead. He saw Lenny lying on the sand. "Got him, by God." He went over and looked down at Lenny, and then he looked back at George. "Right in the back of the head," he said softly. Slim came directly to George and sat beside him, sat very close. "Never you mind," said George. "A guy got to sometimes." But Carlston was standing over George. "How'd you do it?" he asked. "I just done it," George said tiredly. "Did he have my gun?" "Yeah, he had your gun." "And you got it away from him? And you took it and you killed him?" "Yeah, that's how." George's voice was almost a whisper. He looked steadily at his right hand that held the gun. Slim twitched George's elbow. "Come on, George. Me and you will go get a drink." George let himself be helped to his feet. "Yeah, a drink." Slim said, "You had to, George. I swear you had to. Come on with me." He led George into the entrance of the trail and up toward the highway. Curly and Carlson looked over at them, and Carlson said, "Now, what the hell you suppose is eating them two guys?" He had to kill his friend. He had to kill his friend, and he had to do it himself. Candy, the old man, couldn't bear to put his best friend, the dog, down, and so somebody else did it. It was like, not a foreshadowing, it was like, I guess it was foreshadowing, a lesson learned thing from Candy's regret of letting somebody else put his dog down, that George had to take it into his own hands to end Lenny's life, so he wouldn't be, like, in so much pain and stuff, or taken to jail. That's so sad. I hate this book. Like I said, I literally read that earlier today and cried about this already. It's just sad. He didn't have a choice, right? Like, obviously, there wasn't any other options. Not in the 1930s. Not with angry guys with a bunch of guns after such a thing, and they couldn't just make a run for it because it was inevitable that kind of thing would happen again. They can't just run forever. That's so sad. And now he's never gonna have his dream. Yeah, so anyway... That's Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. I can see why obviously there are aspects that date it heavily, don't get me wrong, but it is almost this, like, I don't want to call it a timeless tale, but the hope, the desire, the having a goal, and like working so hard and busting your ass just to have something of your own, just to hope and pray for a little piece of land, to live off the land, have your own little piece of property and work for yourself and find safety and comfort and just do the things that you love, and to look forward to that so much. And to sacrifice so much for somebody that you take care of and somebody that you love and care about, and the sacrifices you make for them. It's all timeless. Like, that's all timeless emotional stuff that is so succinctly and distinctly talked about in 77 pages. To have such strong emotions from me in 77 pages and from a lot of people, obviously, like, this book gets a lot of people, it is a lot. I think it did a great job at portraying that. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have any words. Like I said, I'm not a scholar. I don't have a degree in this stuff, so like I don't want to talk about it from some crazy thematic, like, let's break it down, and like I don't know. There's other videos for that type of thing, right? Like, that's not what this is. I just wanted to tell you the story in case you don't want to read it or you haven't been able to read it. You got to experience it with me. Sorry. Now you can understand why it's such a popular book and why everybody talks about it so much. I would love to hear your guys' opinions about it below if you want to comment. Did you cry? Did I make you cry? And yeah, also comment what other books that you guys would like to read, or would you like to see classics of, like, classic retellings of. I want to do, I think Jane Eyre is on my list. What's the other one? I want to do, like, The Picture of Dorian Gray and Wuthering Heights. What else? Somebody requested Pride and Prejudice. Somebody talked about that. I think that would be a fun one. This is my classics shelf behind me, so I'm just seeing if there's anything else in my immediate vicinity that I want to do. Oh yeah, I definitely need to do, like, like The Scarlet Letter, Breakfast at Tiffany's. Like, I know we're like, hey man, we're running the whole gamut of, like, timelines here and, like, when these books were published, but it's pretty much, I guess my goal for this is I want to read the stuff that has been on my TBR of, like, I can't really call myself, like, a book nerd or a literature nerd until I read the classics, in my opinion. Like, that is, like, a completely self-imposed title and requirement for that title, that I want to be a well-rounded and, like, well-educated in literature. So I'm, like, really wanting to read all of those crazy popular books, all the crazy popular old books, the classics, to figure out what is so great about them. Oh, there's so much I want to do. I just want to talk about books all the time. I want to talk about every book ever all the time. There's just not enough time in the day. Okay. Anyway, sorry, I'm blabbering. I'm just so sad. I'm trying to talk about other stuff so I don't cry again. Yeah, but for real, if you have any classics that you can think of that you would love to hear about, let me know in the comments down below. And otherwise, I will see you guys on Thursday with another review. Like I said, I think I'm gonna go on a little co-host stint for a minute. I'm excited to hate my life. It's gonna be great. All right, thank you guys so much. I appreciate your support. All of you are phenomenal. I'm having such a great time, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.